Today's lesson is bearskins, the hats fit for a king's guard. Hi everybody, I'm Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And today we're going to talk about something called bear skins, which you could guess is something made with the skin or leather of a bear. But these are hats worn by the guards at Buckingham Palace in England. Perhaps you've seen pictures of those guys smartly dressed in red suits with those black hats that stand really tall on top of their heads.
Yes, and these hats are fit for a king's guard. When something is fit for something else, it means that it is appropriate for that other thing, or that it's good enough for that other thing. And since these guards are the guards of the King of England, or the monarchy of Great Britain, then it means that these hats are really good hats. They are good enough or fit for the king.
Exactly. And of course, these hats are fit for a king's guard. We do have the phrase in English, fit for a king, if you talk about something luxurious like stay in a hotel or a special meal. You could say, hey, this meal is fit for a king. Make sure you come and join us. Okay, so let's find out what these hats are all about. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson, and we'll come back to talk about it.
Bearskins, the hats fit for a king's guard. Few sights are so iconically British as that of the King's Guard standing watch outside Buckingham Palace in their bearskin caps. But did you know that the bearskin has an intriguing history that involves many militaries besides Britain's? Read on for some interesting facts about this impressive hat.
大家好，第一部分我们来介绍形容词 intriguing， 它的意思是引人入胜的，非常有趣的。例如 The novel had an intriguing plot twist toward the end. 这部小说在结尾处有一个引人入胜的情节转折。又或者说 The scientists came up with several intriguing theories about the origins of the universe. 关于宇宙起源，那位科学家提出好几个非常有趣的理论。
So the first sentence of today's lesson says, few sights are so iconically British as that of the King's Guard standing watch outside Buckingham Palace in their bearskin caps. So that is true if you've never been to England, if you've just seen pictures of London, for instance, you may have come across images of guards standing in front of Buckingham Palace, which is the residence of the monarchy of Great Britain. And these guards stand there and they're wearing bearskin caps. So this sight is iconically British. So the word iconically, first of all, is an adverb. And if we look at the adjective form of this adverb, iconic, it means that it's famous for something. So if something is iconic, it's famous for representing a particular thing or a particular idea. So iconically means that something famously represents another idea. So these bearskins, these hats, famously represent the King's Guards.
Right, and of course the base word is an icon, which is a noun, and that's just something that stands for something. Like the Eiffel Tower in Paris is an icon of France. We think of France when we see the Eiffel Tower. And yes, indeed, sometimes we think of things in England when we see those hats on top of those guards when they're standing watch outside Buckingham Palace in those bearskin caps. So if you're standing watch, of course, you're there making sure everything's okay. If you go to the CKS Hall in Taipei, you can see the guards there standing watch in the room with the statue of Chiang Kai-shek, or Chiang Jie, as he's called in some situations. And in this particular case, we're in England and we're at Buckingham Palace where the king lives now. And they're standing watch outside that palace. But did you know that the bearskin has an intriguing history that involves many militaries besides Britain's? Notice in this sentence, we're just calling the hat the bearskin for short. We're not saying the bearskin cap. We're saying the bearskin. And it has an intriguing history. If something's intriguing, it's very interesting and it makes someone want to learn more.
Right. So if something is intriguing, not only is it interesting, but it's also interesting in a strange and mysterious way. Usually refers to something that we didn't know about before that may be very interesting to learn about. So in this case, bearskin has a history that's very strange and interesting, that's very intriguing. And this history involves many militaries besides Britain's. Here, the verb involve just means to include as a necessary part of something or to have to do with something. So you could also say that bearskin has a history that has to do with many militaries. Another example would be I could ask if I were interviewing for a job, does this job involve traveling? In other words, does this job require me or does it have to do with traveling?
Or even applying for a job would involve many steps. You need to send a letter of application. Maybe you get called in for an interview. You go to the interview. You might go to a second interview. So yes, there are many steps involved when trying to get a job. And yes, it's intriguing to find out that bearskin caps have this history with militaries besides Britain's. Okay, Britain, of course, refers to the UK. And read on for some interesting facts about this impressive hat. Yes, indeed, I'd like to learn more. It's very intriguing, this question. So let's move on now to the next part of our lesson. We will listen to it first.
While commonly associated with the British Army, bearskins actually caught on far earlier with French soldiers, who wore them as early as 1761. Back then, they were worn to intimidate opposing armies, and their terrifying appearance soon grabbed the attention of other nations, including Britain, which adopted them over time. The caps worn by British guardsmen are typically 18 inches tall and weigh 1.5 pounds. And they really are made from bears, specifically black bears from Canada. Naturally, this has led to protests by animal rights advocates, but so far only 2 of the 14 countries whose militaries use bearskin caps, Sweden and Italy, have switched to hats made from synthetic materials.
第二部分我们看到动词 intimidate， 它的意思是恫吓、恐吓。例如 The bully used his physical size to intimidate other children. 那个恶霸用自己的体型来恫吓其他孩子。又或者说 Jeff is not intimidated by people who think they have power over him. Jeff 不会被那些自认为对他有控制权的人恐吓。接下来我们看到形容词 terrifying， 这个字的意思是令人害怕的、害人的。例如 Janice finds the thought of losing her daughter terrifying. Janice 觉得失去女儿的这个想法令人感到害怕。或是 The terrifying roller coaster is a popular attraction at the theme park. 那座骇人的云霄飞车是主题乐园中一项受欢迎的卖点。另外，去掉这个字的字尾 ing， 就会变成动词 terrify， 它是指使害怕、使惊吓。例如 After being bitten, the girl was terrified of dogs for a very long time. 在被狗咬了之后，那个女孩很长一段时间都很怕狗。又或者说 The thunder and lightning terrified the children. 电闪雷鸣把孩子们给吓坏了。下一个我们看到单字 adopt， 它是动词，指的是采纳、采用、领养或收养。例如 If you adopt good study habits, your grades will get better. 如果你采用良好的读书习惯，你的成绩就会进步。又或者说 Shane adopted a small dog last week. Shane 上周领养了一只小狗。再来我们看到单字 advocate， 它是名词，指的是提倡者、拥护者。例如 Vera is an advocate for strict environmental laws. Vera 是严格的环境保护法的提倡者。或是 A group of women's right advocates organized a protest outside the city hall. 一群女性权益的拥护者在市政府外发起一场抗议。最后补充，这个字也可以做动词使用，念作 advocate。它的意思是拥护、提倡、主张。例如 The Dutch government advocates the use of bicycles in the cities. 荷兰政府提倡在市区使用脚踏车。再举一个例子 Protesters are advocating that the old tax system be changed. 抗议者主张改变旧的税收制度。
While commonly associated with the British Army, bearskins actually caught on far earlier with French soldiers who wore them as early as 1761. So we learn here that the British Army wasn't the only group of soldiers that adopted bearskins, because bearskins were actually used by the French army before the British as early as 1761. So here we have a phrasal verb which is caught on, and the sentence says that bearskins actually caught on before the British began using them. And caught on basically means to become popular or fashionable. So bearskins became popular before the British began using them because they started with the French soldiers who wore them as early as 1761. As an example sentence, I could also say that Apple computers came out with its AR headset a few months ago, and who knows if it's going to catch on? Who knows if it will be popular, if people will start buying them?
Right. Caught on is the past tense of the phrase to catch on, which means to become accepted by society at large or by somebody. And this reminds me of the U-bikes when they first came out in Taipei. It took a while for them to catch on. I remember the U-bikes just parked at their docks and nobody was riding them for a long time, but eventually they caught on and now you see them everywhere. And yes, indeed, bearskins actually caught on far earlier with French soldiers who wore them as early as 1761. So the French soldiers were wearing them a long time before the guards in England were wearing them. And yes, indeed, they wore them as early as 1761, which is actually before the French Revolution, I believe. And back then, they were worn to intimidate opposing armies. And their terrifying appearance soon grabbed the attention of other nations, including Britain, which adopted them over time. Now, let's back up here to the beginning of the sentence. These caps were worn to intimidate opposing armies. If you intimidate somebody, you kind of frighten them. You put on some kind of posture or some kind of position, and then they're scared of you. And, of course, you do these things in order to scare them, to make them run away.
Right. Or more specifically, if you intimidate somebody, you scare them so that you'll get them to do something that you want. So I could also say to somebody, don't let your boss intimidate you. Don't allow your boss to control you to do whatever your boss wants. You should stand up for yourself. So that's another sense of intimidate. And here, bearskins were worn to intimidate opposing armies. So opposing here is a word that means fighting against. So if you're a soldier, your job is to fight against the enemy or the opposing soldier. I could also talk about an opposing team. If a home team is playing a game against another team, then they are playing against the opposing team or the guest team.
Yep, opposing is related to the word opposite, which means the different part of something, like the opposite of black is white, etc. And so these are two armies that are fighting each other. For instance, maybe the French are trying to fight against the Russians, and the Russians aren't afraid of the French. And so the French put on these hats to intimidate the Russians, and then the Russians see those caps and they go, oh my goodness, those French people are so big and hairy, we better run back to Moscow. And, of course, we're describing these caps as being terrifying. Their terrifying appearance soon grabbed the attention of other nations or other countries, including the UK, Britain, and they adopted those caps over time. If something's terrifying, it's very scary. And yes, indeed, I guess the British were watching the French fight against the Russians or whoever, and they thought, gee, the French are winning more often when they wear those caps. Maybe we should adopt them too.
Right, so it's useful to adopt a terrifying appearance, to have a terrifying appearance if you want to scare the opposing army or if you want to scare your opponent. Terrifying, of course, means scary, frightening. I could also say that I don't like horror movies because they're terrifying and they scare me. But Britain did adopt them over time. Here, adopt means to decide to use something. So I could also say, as an example, I need to adopt a better diet if I want to lose weight. But the original, or I would say the more common meaning of adopt, means to take in somebody else's baby or child into your family and to legally raise that child as your own. So a couple may want to adopt a child if they can't have children on their own, or they want to do something nice for society and adopt another child.
Or you can adopt a pet from the shelter if you want to get a dog or a cat. There are plenty of dogs and cats waiting for homes at your local shelter. You can adopt a pet from an animal shelter. But in this particular case, the British started to use these hats themselves. They adopted these hats for their own use. And the caps worn by British guardsmen are typically 18 inches tall and weigh 1.5 pounds. So we're talking about the guards or members of the King's Guard. And, of course, we're also referring to them as guardsmen. And they typically wear these hats, or at least the hats that they wear, are typically 18 inches tall, which sounds kind of tall. It seems like you'd probably have to walk fairly straight in order to keep those hats from tipping over. And also, they're a little heavy. They weigh 1.5 pounds, so those guards better do some neck exercises to make sure their necks are strong enough to hold those hats up.
And they really are made from bears. So these hats are made from bears, specifically black bears from Canada. So here we have a phrase, to be made from. If something is made from bears, it means that it was created with material that comes from bears. In other words, bear skin, bear leather, or fur. I could also say that paper is made from trees or plastic is made from oil. So in these examples, the original material undergoes a major change to make the final product. That's when you use made from. But you could also say made for in other cases when you recognize the original product and the final product. So I would say this table is made of wood because you can still see the wood. Or this bottle is made of glass because you can still see that it's a glass bottle.
Right. So, of course, Canada is a member of the Commonwealth, so they probably get a special deal. The British get a special deal on black bears so they can make those hats. And naturally, this has led to protests by animal rights advocates. But so far, only 2 of the 14 countries whose militaries use bearskin caps, Sweden and Italy, have switched to hats made from synthetic materials. So, of course, we've got animal rights advocates, and they have been protesting this use of bears for those caps. A protest means somebody is against something. You might see protests in Taipei by maybe teachers who aren't getting paid enough, so they stage a protest in front of the presidential palace to get more pay. And protest is the verb, and an advocate is somebody who supports a particular idea, and they want to get people to accept it. They support a particular cause or policy.
Right. So there are animal rights advocates, and there are also peace advocates, people who fight for peace, who stand up for peace or against war. And so far, only a few countries, a couple of them, Sweden and Italy, have switched to hats made from synthetic instead of bearskin. So synthetic materials refer to materials that are man-made, artificial materials. So nylon, polyester, for example, are synthetic materials.
Indeed, and they might be better to take care of. You never know. Okay, let's move on now to the third and final part of our lesson. We'll listen first.
In time, Britain and the other 11 nations may join them. Regardless of the materials they're made from, however, these remarkable hats will continue to serve as iconic symbols of military history.
In time, Britain and the other 11 nations may join them. So before, we said that out of the 14 countries whose militaries use bearskin caps, only 2, Sweden and Italy, have switched to artificial materials. But in time, The other 12 nations, that is, Britain and the other 11 nations, may join Sweden and Italy and switch to synthetic materials for their caps.
Indeed, but some things are difficult to change. Of course, traditions are hard to change, so it may take Britain or other countries some time to start using synthetic materials in those caps. Regardless of the materials they're made from, however, these remarkable hats will continue to serve as iconic symbols of military history. So it doesn't really matter what the materials are made from. They're still remarkable, and they will be around for quite some time. If something's remarkable, it's worthy of attention. It's something that you need to pay attention to because a remark is something that somebody says or it's an observation that somebody makes. So again, if something's remarkable, it's worthy of attention.
Right. I could say, for instance, that the musician has remarkable talent, which means that this musician has talent that's very impressive and very unusual and noteworthy.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Let's listen now to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分写到 While commonly associated with the British Army, bearskins actually 它是表达说虽然熊皮帽常与英国军队联想在一起，但实际上怎么样。那前半句这个 while commonly associated with the British Army 其实是由 while bearskins are commonly associated with the British Army 所简化而来的，它是省略了相同的主词 bearskins， 那么动词部分省略了 be 动词 are， 只保留了分词 associated 来形成分词构句。好，那接着我们就来介绍这个 associate A with B 的用法。 associate 它也可以念作 associate， 它当动词可以表达联想或是使有关联。那除了用 associate A with B， 也常用被动语态 A be associated with B 去表达出两种常见的语义哦。第一种是表达说将 A 和 B 联想在一起，例如 Many people associate summer with the beach， 许多人会把夏天跟海滩联想在一起。那第二个语义是表示使 A 和 B 有关联，像 These symptoms are associated with anxiety， 这些症状与焦虑症有关。好，我们看到同样在课文第二部分，他有提到说引起动物权利倡导者的抗议，文中是用 advocate当名词来指提倡者。那这边补充一下哦， VOC 或是 VOK 或是 VOW 这一类字根带有 call、speak、sound、voice 的意思，表示说话、叫喊或是声音等等。那么在 advocate 这个字当中，它的字首 AD 表示朝向，字根 VOC 是说话，那么 ATE 可以当动词字尾或当名词字尾。那同学们可以试着联想，对着大众发言的人，朝向大家说话的人，就是去大力提倡某件事的人。所以 advocate 当名词就是提倡者、拥护者，那么当动词是念作 advocate， 表示拥护、提倡或是主张。好，那课文最后有提到说，无论熊皮帽是由什么材质制成，这些引人注目的帽子将继续作为军事史的代表性象征。文中用到片语介系词 regardless of，去表达说不管怎么样，不论怎么样，那它后面可以接名词、动名词或是名词子句。举例来说 The event will take place next Sunday regardless of the weather， 不管天气如何，那场活动会在下周日如期举行。好，那我们再看个例句，是在 regardless of 后面接名词子句的。You must stick to your goal regardless of what other people think。 不管别人怎么想，你一定要坚持自己的目标。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Involve. The discussion will involve all team members promoting teamwork and productive sharing of ideas. Oppose. Claire plans to oppose her best friend Janice in the election for class president. Terrifying. My sister warned me that this horror movie is quite terrifying. Adopt. After 2 failed attempts, Michael adopted a more careful approach to preparing for his driving test. Protest. The students organized a peaceful protest to raise awareness of climate change. Advocate. Bonnie is a fearless advocate for human rights. Remarkable. Rick's mathematical ability is remarkable for someone so young.
Discussion starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter. The question is, what are your thoughts on the use of real bearskin for bearskin hats?
I think that no countries should use the skin of real bears in the hats. It would be better if all of the countries adopted synthetic materials. I personally am an advocate of animal rights, so that's what I believe.
Well, in my opinion, the countries that use real bearskin might have some good reasons for doing so, because sometimes you hear news reports about bears attacking people, and there is the problem of overpopulation with bears in Canada and maybe the United States. So if we kill some of those bears to make those hats, that's a small price to pay.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Helen.
I am Roger.
See you next time.